So Jules, did you ever come across a good prison officer that you got on with?
Yeah, a good few. A good few.
Oh, yeah, well done.
Yeah, I'm not going to list them now, but there was good ones. What about you?
Yeah, a few good ones. There was one in High Point. He was particularly really good. He knew what he was doing. So yeah, like,
Shout
big up
him out.
yourself, Mr. I can't remember your name, but big up yourself same way. Hello and welcome back to Life After Prison with Jules and Zak. Today joining us in the studio we have a former prison officer and the author of Behind These Doors, Alex South. Hello.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
Welcome. Thank you for coming.
How you doing?
Really well, thank you. How are you guys?
Good. Fine, thanks.
Yeah, good.
Good.
Feeling good.
Let's get straight into it then, Alex, yeah? Which prisons were you an officer in and for how long?
So I started at HMP Whitemoor in Cambridgeshire. I was there for about 3 years. Then I became an SO and moved on to Wormwood Scrubs in West London. I was there for a couple of years. And then I had the last 5 years of my career at Belmarsh in Thamesmead.
Okay, sweet. So obviously you just mentioned you got to SO. Is that the highest rank you got to?
So I did about 6 months as a temporary CM, custodial manager as well. That was at Scrubs.
3 stripes, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Made it to the big time of 3 stripes. But it took me away from the part of the job that I enjoyed. Okay. It's a lot of paperwork, which is, necessary for that kind of role. It's much more management and HR kind of thing. It didn't suit me. I don't think I was particularly good at it. So I went back down to SO.
Okay.
Happens when you go up. It's like
strange that, isn't
it? You come off like the front.
Yeah, you feel like the area where you actually have influence. The higher you go up, the
just
less.
More paperwork when you get higher.
That's how it felt.
So what is the main reason that you wanted to become a prison officer?
The main reason? That's a hard question. I think, even though I know this sounds a bit idealistic and maybe a bit naive, but I did really want to do good. And I had seen from some of my volunteering in some jails that you can do that in the officer's role. And I worked alongside some of them who were excellent in places like Peterborough and Littlehay. And I thought, that's what I want to do. And I know it sounds a bit idealistic, but actually I still believe that. I still believe that I did some good in that role. I'm really proud of most of my experiences. And I think that loads of staff today still do good.
It's it's nice to hear that, actually, yeah. From someone in your position to say that.
What kind of SO were you?
God, I've never been asked that before. What kind of SO was I? So I had a couple of really good SOs and a really good CM when I first joined.
Okay.
They were the kind of people who, particularly the CM that I worked with, I felt like if he appeared on the wing, everything would always be fine.
Okay.
I felt like he had just an air of confidence, of strength, and he was decent. He's a really good guy as well. So I think when I took on that role, I always had him in my mind as this is the kind of person I want to emulate. And with the other staff around me, I want them to feel like when I'm here, it's going to be all right. We'll get things under control, even if it feels chaotic. I'm calm. I'm listening to everyone's opinions. So I think in terms of staff, I'd like to describe myself as like very staff orientated, very staff led. In terms of working with the prisoners, I really wanted to be in amongst it, to be honest. I wanted to get to know the people that I was meant to be running a wing on. And so I'd say I was involved as much as is possible in that job. Obviously, there's a bit of paperwork you've got to do there as well, but fairly strict as well. And I think that's necessary.
Okay.
I think people pick up pretty quickly if they can kind of
push the boundaries.
Yeah. Absolutely. So I always tried to be firm but fair. Okay. There were unquestionably times that I fell short of that, especially when I was really stressed. But generally, I went there wanting to be a good person, doing good things. And I would like to say that's the kind of SO I was.
Sounds good. Sounds balanced.
You might have to ask some of the prisoners. They might be listening to this thinking,
if you're listening, Alex was your SO, get in touch with us.
And let us know your opinion.
No, I'm joking. So we've learned that you started off as a volunteer in prisons, right?
Yes.
Before you became an officer. So when you actually did become an officer, was the role exactly what you expected?
No, absolutely not. So being a volunteer was so nice. It's just nice. You just pop in for a couple of hours and I remember the guy I was working with, I helped him write his CV and we talked about budgeting and, you know, I mean, no one at Whitemoor wanted me to do their CV for them. Do you know what I mean? Like, no one's like, oh, how do I spend my money? It was a very, very different role. And I'd really wanted to go to Little Hay. Like I knew the staff, I knew the layout. I felt comfortable there.
You're talking about HMYY, Little Hay, right?
Yeah, when it was young offenders. Yeah, that's where I wanted to be. So I wasn't that excited when I got sent to a Cat A high security instead. That wasn't my plan.
What made you want to go to Little Hay?
I just felt like I knew the area. I knew because I've been volunteering there for 2 years.
Oh, yeah, okay.
It's little things, but in any job, I think you'd feel that way, wouldn't you? You know some of the people there. You don't feel as...
Especially going into that role as well.
Exactly. You already feel like the odd one out.
Yeah.
But I felt less so there. But yes, it was really different because the skills I'd gained were really useful, but no one wanted me to do their CV or, you know, that kind of thing was irrelevant to the people at Whitemoor. And also, as a volunteer, you have no disciplinary obligations. You're not there to challenge if something goes wrong, and you're not there to step in if it really goes wrong. But obviously at Whitemoor, you know, I absolutely was. So it was a real change. But for the good, you know, it took me time to settle in, but I feel like I rose to it.
What would you say your experience was like as a new officer then at HMP Whitemoor, Category A?
I remember that first day so well. I was so like, you know, just must do everything by the book. And I remember because at Little Hay, they called me Miss South.
Yeah, okay.
And one of the prisoners said to me when I walked on the wing, he was like, oh, Miss, what's your name? And I said, it's Miss South. And he was like, all right, and what's your name? And I was like, it's Miss South. And then I just see this other officer called Mark walk past. He goes, all right, Mark? And I was like, oh. And everyone calls each other by their first names there. But I didn't know that, which is quite typical of dispersal and high security prisons. It's much more like a community feel. So I think I went in feeling very like, I need to kind of carry myself a certain way. And I learned that actually I didn't. And it's much easier and benefits everyone to just try and come across as a human, you know, rather than, but I was 22 and I was intimidated and I was nervous and trying to kind of, I guess, find myself in that setting before I figured out how to maybe interact with other people. It's hard. It's hard.
Was it a case of I'm going to like refer back to my training, or was it more of I need to learn from the officers around me? What was the approach that you...
Yeah, that's a really good question. That's another thing I remember in those early days. Every officer said to me, forget your training. Okay. Every officer said that to me. And it's difficult because the training was excellent and they teach you as much as they possibly can. But ultimately, you can't replicate a prison environment. Like, of course you can't. You can do as much as possible, but you say a safe word and the scenario stops, you know?
Yeah.
So it's completely different. But that's not to bash the training at all because I think they do the best that you can when it's not the same place.
Yeah.
But yeah, I learned everything from the staff and the best staff as well. It was like a masterclass in like emotional intelligence, which are the things I think people don't see in an officer's role sometimes. But I was learning from people with a minimum of 6 or 7 years, but around 20, 25 years.
Which you do learn on the job, or you learn from people? I mean, sorry, you do learn in training, or do you learn it from people around you, the officers around you?
I learned it from the officers around me once I actually started.
Do you think that should be like in the training to become an officer? Because this is something we've spoken about before, like how are officers trained and what are they trained in?
Yeah.
So to hear you say that's great, and I'm sure that is, you learn on the job.
Absolutely.
And which is what you probably have to do as a prison officer.
Yeah.
But you're learning the crucial stuff from the other officers, which is obviously important,
and from experience.
Do you think that should be in the training?
I think if they could find a way to kind of bring that in, because that's the answer to everything, I think.
It's interesting. Like, how would they even bring that in?
I don't know how you'd go about it, but I really do think that, I mean, experience is just like, is currency in prison.
Yeah.
And I think there's so many different like versions of that, but it's being able to pick up on things that as a new officer, I didn't even know to pick up on, you know?
But yes, so I just think some officers might not have that.
I think a lot of people now don't. And I really feel for people in that situation.
What was like the ratio of men to women officers that you were around?
When I first joined, I know it's different now, but I think there was probably about maybe 20 male officers and 3 women.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's quite high of men, isn't it? Because now I hear more and more women are
Yeah.
officers. Do you think, do you feel like the women got treated differently to the men by other staff in the prison?
So generally, no, particularly on my wing, they were fantastic. You know, everyone was treated and saw each other the same, and we really backed each other no matter what. But I do remember being in the education department there, and I think I'd been in maybe 6 months. So I'd gained my confidence a bit, but I was still nervous and kind of finding my feet. And I remember really clearly sitting with an officer who was very experienced and a nice guy. And he said to me, "No offense, Alex, but I don't think women should work here." I remember thinking, how can I not be offended by that comment? And I don't think that you would get away with saying that today. This was 2012. I don't think you could say that now. And I wonder if he would even say that now. But it just goes to show that viewpoint was there for some people. But it's so, I don't know what it's even rooted in. I mean, I think in men's prisons, there always needs to be more male officers, if for no other reason than because women can't search. So logistically, there needs to be more male officers. But I don't think you can attribute certain skills just to women and certain skills just to men.
Oh, facts. You need a balance.
Absolutely, yeah.
You know what I mean? There's a difference. I think, because you spoke of earlier about emotional intelligence, yeah? And my experience is that the female staff had that more than the men.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So like, they'll be like, oh, no, something's not right here. And they might come chat to some of us like, oh, check on him. Like,
yeah.
Do you get what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think the balance is needed without a doubt.
I agree.
But did prisoners treat you differently as a female officer?
If the answer is yes, then only in terms of like positive sexism, which again, I'm not saying is necessarily okay, but in more of a protective way.
Okay.
So I think people, especially in a category A, high security, people think that I would have had really inappropriate behavior. I hardly had any of that. And on the handful of occasions when I did experience that, it was other prisoners who stepped in and said, so a completely different culture really to how I think people sometimes assume it's going to be in those places. And again, I don't know if it's like that now. I know it probably wasn't the same in the other 2 jails I went to.
Yeah.
But there was a real kind of like almost old school rules, like you don't fight in the chapel, you don't fight in visits in front of kids, and you don't be disrespectful to women. So yes, but actually in a positive way.
So just on this, did you ever feel vulnerable at any point? And also, did any other staff speak about feeling vulnerable at any point?
That's a really good question.
And it might be different in different prisons.
It was definitely.
Because you're talking about category A that you didn't really feel that, but...
No, I didn't. But so across the course of my career, I did not feel safe at Wormwood Scrubs.
Ooh. Okay.
Yeah, is the brutally honest answer to
that. How long
were
you there for?
2 years. The first year was much better. The second year was when the voluntary early departure scheme was brought in for the more experienced officers. And we lost a lot of experience in a really short amount of time.
What was this? Sorry.
It's called VEDS. It was basically like early retirement.
Okay.
But it was offered to lots of officers.
Right.
On the old
contract, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So loads left because you wouldn't.
That was what was that, like 2015, 14, 15?
Yeah, exactly. They brought it in a bit earlier than that, but it took time for the effects to be felt. But I was at Scrubs around 2015 and it hit Scrubs really, really hard. And it coincided with some of the cuts to general governors' budgets, which meant that things like repairs to cells were delayed or didn't happen. It meant like there wasn't as much uniform for staff.
Whoa.
Yeah, new officers often had to have second-hand uniform. We'd be asked if we had any of our old stuff at home that we could bring in.
Mad.
Yeah, so it hit really hard.
That's crazy. Can you imagine that being a bus driver, yeah? And then someone telling you, oh yeah, you got to get someone's old bus driver uniform.
I know.
Or fireman or policeman. But for prison staff, that's a bit crazy. I'm not going to lie.
I think just workplace conditions in general are so important. And for some reason, prison, we skim over that.
I was going to say, like, the prison system is struggling, like, anyway.
Yeah.
So
But uniform though.
I know, but it doesn't surprise me, but it's not okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when you were in Scrubs, were other officers saying the same thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah,
what
I remember.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, go on. We want to hear it.
I mean, obviously, like, obviously you get contraband in any jail,
Mm-hmm.
but particularly in a Cat B, Scrubs, you're not searched on the way in. Scrubs didn't have cages on the windows,
Oh,
which I'd never realised how much of a like basic form of security that
yeah.
is. But I remember there'd be times when I'd put people on basic and then I'd leave and I'd be walking down Duquesne Road and I'd be like, what? I can see them passing the TV
TVs.
through and I'm like, what is the point?
yeah.
But that's not so much of a problem. The issue is when people were having things in, i.e. drones, and then they can just drop whatever off. And I remember there was one time at Scrubs, we had a really serious incident. He was stabbed multiple times with an actual flick knife.
Mm.
And I was speaking to an officer about it and he'd been there a really long time and he was excellent. There was nothing he didn't know. And he said to me, like, what's coming next?
Mm.
Like, it's never been this bad. What comes next if there's real knives in here now? So everyone felt it. And you can be the strongest and the best and the most effective communicator. You can be the world's best officer. But if people are running around with knives, you've just got a really dangerous environment for everyone.
100%.
Yeah. So was this the case in other prisons or was this like the worst part for you?
Scrubs was definitely the worst part, but I feel bad saying that because I worked with excellent staff and a lot of the prisoners there were really great as well. They're trying to do the best in, disgraceful conditions like rats and cockroaches and smash windows. But yeah, for me, it was the worst, definitely. I remember around that time. So I left Whitemoor and I had some really good friends there and we all went to Benidorm when I was at Scrubs, which was awful, but really good fun. I remember thinking I want to tell them what it's like at Scrubs. But at Whitemoor, we'd have one alarm bell maybe a month or two, and often it would be false. And at Scrubs, things were so bad, we'd sometimes have 10, 11 a day.
Mad.
It was really, really bad. And I remember thinking, I don't know if they'd even believe me, because it just sounds like two different jobs. And then around that time, there was a unannounced inspection and they were very, they told the truth. They were really truthful about the things they found. Less than 13% of prisoners left their cells for activities.
Mad.
The Prison Reform Trust described it as a place of Dickensian squalor, which I've never forgotten. That's really stuck in my mind. It's just like a powerful, isn't it? A really powerful phrase. And I just thought, yes, that's it. And I was really glad that people were talking about it because it was it was awful. But at least some of those, professional bodies were coming in and saying it's every bit as bad as the staff are saying.
Did that feel like it? Did it feel like they were helping you out by finding all of these things?
Yeah, I mean, they're limited, aren't they? They can tell people what the problem is, but they're limited how much they can actually do. But it's nice for other people to know the reality of it, I think. But around that time, we had some really serious incidents and conditions were just, our toilets didn't flush.
That's terrible.
I mean, it's just, it was just toilets didn't flush and your windows smashed and someone nicked my jacket and I can't even be annoyed because I know the new staff don't have any jackets. And then we had some really serious violent incidents, again involving actual knives. And so we took action. I can't remember what it's called. When you leave, basically you retreat your labour. You refuse to work. So we stayed.
Okay.
Yeah. So we stayed in the front just outside the gatehouse. And I remember thinking then, this could be like a turning point. We're saying it's unsafe in there. It's really dangerous. And we're not going back to work until we can have some assurances that this is going to change. And I remember thinking then that I really felt part of something, And all that really happened is I lost a day's pay. And then, do you know what I mean? And then we went back in and
it's terrible, isn't it?
People were really annoyed, worse than before, because they'd been banged up for over 24 hours by this point. And there was still contraband, there was still alarm bells, there was still people jumping on the netting. And
who is the person that you speak to about this? And do you get to directly speak to them? Or is this all through, how's it all done?
Yeah, what's the procedure?
So the Prison Officers Association, the union, they're excellent. They're the people to go to in terms of anything to do with workplace conditions or workplace standards. But again, their hands are tied as well. If they can't force change, I think ultimately that has to come from people at the very top.
Which is?
Politicians.
Right.
I think it's just
yeah. So every time we speak about it, me and Zak even went to like a conference kind of thing. And Zak, in front of everybody, asked the question, like, who do we actually go to? So it's just quite clear, like, it is the government that, the politicians and the government that has to make this change.
I think so. I mean, I know that.
Otherwise, it's Otherwise, it's not going to be done. And then
Otherwise, it's just talk.
The people that, you know, you're saying that are really good people, even their hands are tied. So
Absolutely.
It's kind of unfair on them and unfair on other people that are in similar kind of roles to them.
Exactly that. And I think the problem with that is, especially in some of the recent events that have happened, that have been in the news around news around prisons, media around prisons, they focus on individual people or individual jails and they say they're not doing their job properly. And maybe there's an element of truth to that in some cases. But for me, my experience, you've got excellent governors there. You've got really good senior management teams who want to do the right thing. And 99% of staff are there for the right reasons.
Yeah.
But they can't do it with no resources, no infrastructure, no funding and no staff. And ultimately that comes from the people at the very top wanting to invest in prisons. And I just wonder if, I mean, hopefully now is like maybe a pivotal time for change, but
yeah, let's see, man.
We'll see.
You want to see, innit? Were you ever in the prison where officers were, you know, where there was alleged misconduct by officers?
Yes, not at Whitemoor, but I was at Scrubs and Belmarsh, yeah.
Okay. Oh, even in the marsh?
Yeah.
Oh.
Was it a regular thing?
It wasn't, it was nowhere near as regular as the press make out.
Okay.
Nowhere near. But yes, it happened. And, you know, I really kind of changed my view on it a bit. So when I was at Whitemoor, there was collectively kind of a view among staff that to be bent, like colloquially, is the lowest of the low.
Mm.
And I kind of really took that on. And then I did a bit of work in Scrubs, but particularly in Belmarsh as well, around security. And I just saw like a much bigger picture.
Okay.
And I saw that some of the officers, both male and female, and women get tarred with this a lot, but it's not just women, that there were real issues of vulnerability and that people were targeted for specific kind of obvious vulnerabilities. And so I don't think it's as maybe like...
It's not black and white.
It's not. I really don't think it is. And I know that it sounds so easy to say, but there's a much bigger picture. And I think if we actually want to reduce corruption in jails, we have to be prepared to look at all of it. And we have to be prepared to look at protecting our staff and real staff welfare, as well as just coming straight down the line of this one person has done something wrong. Which is not to say that people haven't done stuff wrong, obviously.
I mean, it's a different world in there, isn't it? It's a different environment, very heightened. We can all relate to knowing it's just another world, isn't it? So
it's a whole nother world. It's got its own currency, its own language, its own status quo, you know, its own values.
Yeah.
It's nuts. But when you explain that to someone that hasn't been there, it sounds like...
You just sound weird.
You just sound like you're chatting rubbish.
Yeah, you just sound weird. Is that right?
Yeah, but that's the case, isn't it? So we've seen in a report by the Independent that in 2023 there were 774 years worth of mental health sick time taken off by prison and probation staff in 1 year.
Yeah,
that's crazy. First of all, why do you think this was the case?
There is not enough time in the world for me to say I think that's the case, but
let's try.
So where am I even going to start on this? Sometimes when I talk about like the exposure to violence and trauma in prisons, particularly to people who don't know about prison and maybe are not very sympathetic towards prisons as a whole, they will say, well, that's what you signed up for.
Yeah.
But we have gone so far past the point of what you would ever realistically expect to encounter in prison. Like a violent incident is a violent incident, but we've had prisoner on prisoner murders.
Yeah.
That's appalling, you know, like that's not a little fight in the canteen. Like that's a serious level of violence that is impossible really to get your head around. And I really believe that we have just gone way past the point of where you could ever make that comment of this is what you sign up for. But the problem is our incidents have all increased. So violence, self-harm, but also riots have massively increased. But the staff welfare package has barely changed. And also prisons are so unique, like you were just saying, it's a really specific type of place to live and work. And I don't think you can have like generic employee assistance programs, like a employee assistance helpline. I just don't think is good enough.
No.
And it, like in a way, like borderline offends me. Do you know what I mean? Like, oh, go make a call. You know, I just think, so it doesn't surprise me at all. I think it's got a lot to do with the lack of support for staff. I think it's got a lot to do with staff not feeling heard And that's reflected in, I've gone on about this, but workplace conditions. Like if you treat people with contempt, then it's reflected in, it comes out in some way. And I say that for both prisoners and staff, you know, like the conditions we are asking people to live and work in are just appalling, some of them, like the filth and the squalor of it.
And that translates even towards the staff, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's not as if, you know, prisoners' toilets are really bad and then the staffs are really good. Like, I know I'm going on about toilets here, but there's just something about like going to the toilet. It's like, more, I don't know. It's such basic stuff that I think you could do. And it's obviously not going to fix prisoners overnight, but there's the ways you can kind of communicate like a bit of value to a person. And we respect the job that you're doing. And we think your presence here is worthwhile.
And working toilets is definitely one of
just
them.
think
No, it's true.
I just think it's a part of that. I mean, yeah, obviously there's worse things than working toilets, but it's a big deal for me. So yeah, it's all the trauma and the lack of response to it, I think, really. And also for me personally, I was really stressed and really burnt out toward the end. And I was in like a good place. Like I was in the securities department at Belmarsh. Like I had it all right there. I'd done my time on the wings. You know, I was out, but...
Done my time, I was out.
Oh, done with it. You couldn't have dragged me back on there. But I think you can put up with a lot if you feel like you're getting something out of it. I think that's like an anchor sometimes. You can mitigate the really tough stuff if you think, but there's a point to what I'm doing. I remember I'd see guys at Scrubs who were in for fairly low level offences, and then I'd meet them again at Belmarsh when they were on remand at the Bailey for murder or double murder. And I'd see similar things at Belmarsh. So many young drug addicted guys, particularly, they'd go on the Friday, they'd be back in next Friday. And I just start to think, I don't really know what I'm doing here. Do you know what I mean? The toilets don't flush. And I just don't really know. I'm struggling to see like the value. And then what we were just talking about with staff corruption, there was one particular incident, and it's the one that kind of swayed it for me. And I knew that she had really fallen for this guy, and she really believed it was genuine. So long after she was gone, she would write to him, and he obviously never wrote back. And I remember talking to him, and he's just like, and he said, "It's a dog eat dog world, Alex. I just don't know why I'm here anymore, because I don't feel like I can do anything." And I think that's a massive contributor to staff taking mental health related sick leave. And I think it would be for anyone.